Hi everyone! Today I want to talk more in depth about a book I mentioned in my last vlog, Looking for Alaska by John Green. I finished this book last week and I really want to talk about it. I have a lot to say about this book. This video is going to be divided into two parts. The first part is going to be like generic thoughts about the book, completely non-spoilery, and the second half of the video is going to be more specific comments about things that happen in the book and is going to be pretty spoilery. So you can watch the first half if you haven't read it without fear of the story getting spoiled for you, but if you hate spoilers and you haven't read this book, then you need to turn this video off when I tell you to, okay? Okay, so part one, generic overview of the book. Before, Miles Pudge Halter is done with his safe life at home. His whole existence has been one big non-event, and his obsession with famous last words has only made him crave the great perhaps, Francois Rabelais, poet, even more. He heads off to the sometimes crazy, possibly unstable, and anything but boring world of Culver Creek boarding school, and his life becomes the opposite of safe. Because down the hall is Alaska Young, the gorgeous, clever, funny, sexy, self-destructive, screwed up, and utterly fascinating Alaska Young, who is an event unto herself. She pulls Pudge into her world, launches him into the great perhaps, and steals his heart. After, nothing is ever the same. You can tell from reading it that the book is divided into two parts, before and after. And before, some defining event that happens to the characters in the book, and then after that defining event. And you can see right when you open up the book to the very first page that it's dated, it's not just in chapters, but it's according to a space and time before or after the defining moment. So 136 days before, 126 days before, and then like 2 days after, 4 days after, 83 days after. I'd never really thought about it before, but we definitely do date our lives that way, before and after defining events. And when I was reading some of John Green's commentary about why he wrote the book the way he did, a lot of our timekeeping methods are before and after. Christians date time before and after the birth of Christ. In America, we kind of date time like before and after 9/11. You hear a lot that we live in a post 9/11 world now. So it is very interesting to think about these defining moments, and it was something that I hadn't thought very much about before, but is really true that we all have certain defining moments in our life that we kind of frame how we think about events that happen to us. This book it's a YA book, so it's written for high school students, about high school students, and I would recommend it for high school students. I really enjoyed it. It really made me think, not just about the before and after, but the defining moment in the book really made me think about how we deal with those kinds of defining moments. I'm trying really hard not to spoil it in this part. And I think it can prompt a lot of discussion, but I would not recommend it for younger teenagers, because there is a lot of self-destructive behavior in this book. There's underage drinking, there's smoking, there's a lot of cursing, and there is a little bit of sexual content in there as well. Not that I don't think this book encourages any of that behavior at all. In fact, when you read this book and you look at the events in this book, it's discouraging a lot of the self-destructive behavior. It does not paint it in a good light at all. So I would not say that it encourages it, but it does have it in there. So I think I wouldn't recommend it for the super young teenagers, like middle school. I wouldn't read it. I wouldn't recommend it for middle schoolers. But I do think that for high schoolers it is a really good read and can prompt a lot of discussion about some self-destructive behavior that kids engage in high school. I wonder if we're kind of perpetuating the everyone is doing it notion with these kinds of books when we're trying to discourage it. I don't know. That's something that I thought about while I was reading it, because I never got the everyone is doing it vibe when I was in school, but I always get it from books, like from YA books and from movies and things like that. Like, everyone's doing it, but everyone's not doing it in my life, but they're all doing it in the fictional world. Whatever. But it doesn't, even though it kind of gives the sense that it's really prevalent with teenagers, it does not encourage it. But overall, I would say that this is a really good book. It provokes a lot of discussion about important issues that teenagers are go through, and issues like, I don't know if I can talk about those issues without spoiling the book, so I'm going to go ahead and get into part 2. So if you don't want to hear about specific plot points, and you don't want to hear about things that happen in the book, stop this video now. Okay, so on to the more spoilery bits. So I really liked this book, but it made me cry. Okay, so the defining moment when Alaska passes away in a car accident is so heartbreaking for me. Because the story is narrated by Miles, or Pudge, you don't see the car accident. You only see the night before when he lets Alaska leave drunk and doesn't know where she's going, and wakes up in the morning to hear from the school principal that Alaska died in a car accident the night before, and that she was really, really intoxicated. And it's so, so sad, because you not only have to deal with, the grief that a classmate of his died, and a close friend of his died, a girl that he was in love with died, but that, he's blaming himself, and that he's not completely blameless in this, because he knew that she was drinking. He let her drink, and he let her leave and go somewhere when she was drunk, and he didn't stop her. So there's definitely a sense of sadness, and then also complete and total guilt. And just that guilt, like when I was reading it, it made me feel the guilt that he felt. And it was just so heartbreaking. I just started crying in the middle of the teacher's room. I read this when I had some free time at work. It was like the end of the day, and I'd finished everything, and so I decided to read my book. And it was a good decision because it's a really good book. It was a terrible decision because it made me cry. I was just like pouring tears and trying to wipe them away really, really quickly so that people couldn't see that I was crying, because I was just like, but I had to keep reading, because I had to know what happened. And wondering whether or not she killed herself or it was an accident is just so heart-wrenching, and it never gets solved. And I think that provokes a lot of discussion, because when you look at John Green's website and the commonly asked questions about, did Alaska commit suicide, or was it really an accident, he says that even he doesn't know, because the book is narrated from Miles's perspective, and he was not in the car with Alaska that night. John Green was not in the car with Alaska that night, and we were not in the car with Alaska that night, so we'll never know. Sometimes there are questions we have that need answers that we'll never get, and that's life. Sometimes something just remain unknown. And we have to learn how to deal with those ambiguities. And, watching Miles and the Colonel and the other characters in this book come to terms with that ambiguity, is painful to feel and experience with them. But it's something that we kind of have to deal with in life. In life, not everything is wrapped up in a super pretty bow, and you have to learn to live with those ambiguities, and in spite of the suffering, find hope. So, how are you going to find that radical hope in your life? And I really, the ending of the book, it doesn't ever solve whether or not Alaska committed suicide or not, but it does kind of give Miles that hope. I really liked how at the end he decides that what gives him radical hope is the prospect of forgiveness. How kind of Pudge decides to take a different path and forgive himself because he knows Alaska forgives him. In the end, after he reads Takumi's note, he says, "And as I walked back to give Takumi's note to the colonel, I saw that I would never know. I would never know her well enough to know her thoughts in those last minutes, would never know if she left us on purpose. But the not knowing would not keep me from caring, and I would always love Alaska Young, my crooked neighbor, with all my crooked heart." I really like what he says, because I will forget her, yes. That which came together will fall apart imperceptibly slowly, and I will forget, but she will forgive my forgetting, just as I forgive her for forgetting me and the colonel and everyone but herself and her mom in those last moments she spent as a person. I know now that she forgives me for being dumb and scared and doing the dumb and scared thing. I know she forgives me just as her mother forgives her. And here's how I know. Although no one will ever accuse me of being much of a science student, one thing I learned from science classes is that energy is never created and never destroyed. And if Alaska took her own life, that is the hope I wish I could have given her. Forgetting her mother, failing her mother and her friends and herself, those are awful things, but she did not need to fold into herself and self-destruct. Those awful things are survivable, because we are as indestructible as we believe ourselves to be. When adults say teenagers think they are invincible with that sly, stupid smile on their faces, they don't know how right they are. We need never be hopeless because we can never be irreparably broken. We think that we are invincible because we are. They forget that when they get old. They get scared of losing and failing. But that part of us greater than the sum of our parts cannot begin and cannot end, and so it cannot fail. So I know she forgives me, just as I forgive her. I don't know where there is, but I believe it's somewhere, and I hope it's beautiful. I love that lesson that it can teach, like, teenagers that think about that, especially kids that are going through things in life that, no matter what happens, it is survivable and you have a radical hope and you can find a way to get through it. And that, forgiveness is there, whether it's something that you've done or something that people are doing to you. There's hope, and you will survive it. And I also like that when you read interviews with John Green about the book, he never gives any definitive answers to questions that you have about it, because he likes to say that books belong to their readers, and the meaning that you get from the book is the meaning that you make from it. But there are different good and correct interpretations you can derive from this book that maybe even John Green himself wouldn't come to. So that's what I thought of the book. I think that if I read it again, I would have even more to say. I think it's something that kind of keeps you thinking and discussing. And I think it probably would be a really good book to teach in school, maybe to seniors, juniors or seniors. But don't read it in public because you will cry. Trust me, you're going to cry. I cried. You're going to cry. But it is a really good book. I really am interested in reading more of John Green's books now. And if I read more of them, of course, I will talk about them here again. If you read it, let me know and let's talk about it, okay? Yay, literacy.